Hello, folks. Anybody know what day Thursday is? It's a holiday. No. It's a birthday? No. It's an anniversary of something very important. 9/11, 24 years ago. And I don't do a 9/11 show every year, but I want to do one this year. There's a special reason why, because we're finally, all this time later, ready to hear the truth about 9/11 and about a whole bunch of stuff. Whistleblowers are coming out, and we're about to have a tsunami. And what we need to know is we need to basically start, in my opinion, way back here, and we need to go forward and understand how an entire generation of people have been controlled by the events that started on 9/11, that led to '08, that went on to a number of other events, including what they did with COVID, because we need to have all that fresh in our minds. It's 24 years have passed, and I want you to be familiar with this, because this is going to be back in the news cycle again as all these whistleblowers start to come out. So with that, we're going to go into the first slide, and we're going to break this down. So this is 9/11. And we're basically doing it the week of the anniversary of the 24th year. Who knows where they were on 9/11 at that moment? I know exactly where I was. I know where I was when Kennedy was assassinated, and I know where I was when those towers were hit. So this is a very, very important story. And what you're going to see here is that at the time this happened, I think we were so shocked, and we still kind of trusted our government. So whatever they told us, we were ready to believe. So for those that haven't gone back and paid attention to this over the last 24 years, I'm hoping that you'll be able to look at this, wipe out the cognitive dissonance, and look at the pictures that I show you and listen to what I say. And I think you will understand this was the mother of all false flag events queued up in order to control us from then until now, in order to set the stage for the financial collapse of the United States of America, to drive us into absolute slavery. So with that, let's go to the next slide and let's start digging in. So what I decided I wanted to do is to not go straight into 9/11, but I want to go back, and I want to show you a pattern. I want to show you that how they control us. So before I even get into the details of this slide, I'm going to take you back verbally even further. I'm going to take you back even before America was a nation. I'm going to take you back to what they call the 100-Year War. And what happened in that 100-year war was France and England fought for 100 years. England went bankrupt. They went to the Rothschilds and said, "Hey, Mr. Rothschild, or Lord Rothschild, we want to borrow some money." And he said, "Sure, King. I only got one little question. I want you to let me print your money for perpetuity and charge you interest." The king didn't have any choice, and so he said, "Okay." And that was the birth of the first central bank. And here's what happened. At that moment, they understood something. They understood that if they could drive a nation into a war, cause them to have bankruptcy, they could force them to take a central bank. And decades later, Stalin said that adopting a central bank is 90% of what? Communizing a nation. So let's jump forward to the founding of the United States of America. And we fought the war so we could wouldn't be inflicted with the Central Bank of England. And we won that war, and everything looked great. But before Washington was even out of office, the war had bankrupted us, and we were under the Central Bank of England. And 20 years later, it's 1811, and the charter is expired, and we said, we're not going to renew it. And England says, "Okay, I'll take you back to colonial status." The War of 1812, which we won. But guess what? We went bankrupt again. And then we're back under the second central bank. And then we finally got out of that under Andrew Jackson. And then along comes the traitor Woodrow Wilson. And at Christmas time, when most of the people were gone, they had a vote and inflicted us with the illegal, unconstitutional Federal Reserve. And that's what we're under this day. But we're doing this today because we're coming into that time where we're going to get out from under the central bank once again. We're going to get out from under the fiat debt slavery system, and we're going to go to a system that is going to allow us to basically control the money, because he who controls the money controls the nation, controls the world. And so that's why I'm doing this, because all of this is going to come out in the next probably 60 days. We're going to have we've been drip, 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 and now we're ready for a tsunami, because we've got basically Chelsea Gabbard coming up and saying we're going to file criminal charges against a whole lot of very important people. So now we're ready to go into the slides. So you can bring that slide up full screen. So we're going to go to a war. We're going to go to World War I. And most people don't know history like I do, because God said, you've got to know history and you got to know the Bible. So going before that war, our greatest ally in Europe was Germany. They were building a transcontinental railroad. They were adopting the technology from the Industrial Revolution coming from America, and they were rising up to be the greatest economic threat to England in the world, other than the United States. So the British decided, we've got to have World War One, because they're building a transcontinental railroad system connecting Europe, coming over in Bering Strait into Alaska, down into to America. And we already had a rail line east to west. And then McKinley was trying to negotiate a railroad line down through Mexico, Pan America, into South America. And they were going to come over with a railroad across Gibraltar into Africa. And every place in the world except Australia would have been connected by rail. And what would that have done? That would have ended control by trade of England, and that would have crushed the principal monetary supply chain of the global financial elite. So they orchestrated World War I in order to make sure that all those railroads were destroyed, that Germany was destroyed, and that England retained control of trade by sea. And they came to the United States and said, we need you to come into this war, not on the side of Germany, but on the side of the Allies and the side of the British, which we did. And why? Because they told us a story. They said, listen, that war will make you so wealthy you can't even believe it. It'll be fought in Europe, not on the United States. You'll supply all the war equipment and make gobs of money. And when it's over, you can rebuild it. And you know what? We won't get hurt either, because we're an island. We're going to be off the mainland, and all of our money mostly comes from around the world, from our colonies. So we'll come out of this wealthy and happy, and you will too. And look at all the money that we'll make. And so we decided we would do that. And here's what happened. There were articles printed in the New York newspaper saying, America, do not send the Lusitania into the war zone, because we know, we've been watching the docks. We know you've loaded that ship with munitions. And if you come into the war zone, we're going to sink it. And so they did. We sent it and they sank it. And decades later, we found the ship. And what did we find? Hey, guess what? It was loaded munitions. So that we knew at that point, it really was a false flag event. But they were willing to kill all the people on the Lusitania. And in that war, they killed 21 million people and 20 million were wounded. And now let's go on to World War II. And we have another situation where they told us the same story. America, this war will be fought over in Europe, and you'll come out richer and more powerful than ever. And so basically Roosevelt agreed, and he concocted an eight-point plan to get Japan to attack us, because it was imperative that it looked like we had been harmed, the false flag event. So basically, what did we do? We sent ships into the war zone hoping they'd attack us. They didn't do that. We put boycotts on their oil. And remember, Japan has no oil, and on their steel. And we put them in a really tough position. And so what happened? They needed to give them a target. And they went out Franklin went out to 3 different admirals. And the first 2 said, I won't put the 7th Fleet in Pearl Harbor. It's within tax range, and there's a war going on. But the third one, wanting power, did it. And what happened? Bam, 3,000 men were killed at Pearl Harbor as those ships sat there like sitting ducks. Took us into the war, and 16 million people died, and 15 million were wounded. We are dealing with some of the evilest individuals in the entire world. And all of this is leading up to what we're going to talk about today, which is 9/11. And then we're going to talk about more stuff like this for the next several weeks, because it's finally time for the truth as to how we've been enslaved to come. And that takes us to Vietnam. And that's where America, for the first time, started to really go into debt. And that was designed to be a perpetual war to last for decades. And it was another false flag event. The Gulf of Tonkin turned out to have been a lie, and they took us into the Vietnam War, and 3.8 million people died and 3.9 were wounded. And then that comes as to where we're getting ready to transition into the day story. That took us to 9/11, and that created the Iraq War and the Afghan War, and 4.5 million people died in the war, and around 3,000 died when the towers came down. So with that, we're ready to go into Who were the culprits behind 9/11? And who are the people who have been controlling America for most of your lifetime and most of mine? So enter Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Bush, both Bushes. But here we're talking about Bush Jr. So here's what happens. They orchestrate this war. And what's Obama's role? He gets out of Harvard. He files a suit against Citibank for discrimination. He wins, all rigged, all set up. And what happens? That allows the creation of the predatory lending loans that basically took us into the 2008 collapse. So now we're looking, the war has already started. Bush has got us into that. And now we're looking at how do we get to 08. So here's what they did. For the first time in history, you can buy a house, no money down, no income verification. And that never happened. And so basically people who had no business in the world buying a house bought it. They bought it with an ARM, and that ARM revalued in 3 years. And all of a sudden, millions of those people who never qualified for a house were in default. And they told us, everything's okay, no problem. And then, bam, in one day, Lehman Brothers collapses. They knew. And what did they say to us? Hey, you've got to, anyway, basically it was all staged. And what was the role of Clinton? Clinton basically, leading into this, he got rid of the firewall that had protected the mergers of banks and the creation of banks that were too big to fail by passing the Glass-Steagall, or I shouldn't say passing, by repealing the Glass-Steagall Act. And the very next day, JP Morgan had the largest bank merger in the world. And when the collapse came down, we had to bail the banks out because, remember, they were too big to fail. And then what would Bush's role? Bush's role starts in 9/11, but it concludes in the Iraq War and everything that happened. So let's pick him up back on the day of 9/11. The towers hit, and he comes on the air, and he says, we're going to war. It's going to be a generational war lasting 20 years or more. And what does Sun Tzu say? You never, ever go into war unless you go in with a plan to win and get out, because perpetual wars just humiliate nations and drive them into bankruptcy. So basically, it was always designed. We had restrictions so that basically we couldn't win. And Trump comes in, and what's he do? In a matter of a few months, he just has the purge, and he just cleans everything up. So there, before that screen, are 3 men who orchestrated the events around 9/11 and around 08 that have severely driven America into absolute financial debt, to the point that we're just about ready to have the financial system collapse. But that gives us the opportunity to bring down the financial system, the fiat paper system controlled by the Fed and the global financial elite. And trust me, we're winning, but we have to have the people woke up so that when all this happens and you start to see Obama and Clinton and Bush and a whole bunch of others arrested, we don't have civil war. So I'm putting this out here today so that we can start to open people's eyes, because you probably haven't thought about this in 24 years. You need to know who the enemy is, and you're looking at 3 of them on this screen right now. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll break this down a little bit further. Here's more proof that, hey, this was planned in advance with malice and forethought. There was a project called Project for the New American Century called PNAC, and here's what happened. They basically had a plan for what they wanted to get out of the war, and basically they wanted 3 objectives. They wanted military bases around the world. They got them. They wanted regime change. Well, didn't Saddam Hussein fall, and didn't he have a lot of oil? And then they wanted to increase the military budget, and they got an extra $1 trillion. And it just so happens, go figure, when we went into that war and we got a little bit into it, people found out about this project. It had been written a year before 9/11, and they said, oh my God, eyes wide open. That was the whole military attack plan, planned a year in advance. False flag, treason. What can I say? Let's go down to the next slide. And now the first real glimpse of the truth. This was one of our very first ever whistleblowers. The man you see there to the left is Aaron Russo. He was a film producer and at one time ran for governor, but didn't win. And he became friends through those 2 modalities with David Rockefeller, who confided in him. And now here's what happens. He has cancer. He's terminal. He knows he's going to die. He has this secret and he doesn't want to take it to his grave. So he becomes a whistleblower. And what happens? He's interviewed on InfoWars, and this is what he said. He was asked, what was the goal? What was the objective of this? And he says, the end goal is to control the whole society, to have the banks and the elite people and some government control what? The entire world. And isn't that what's happened? So there we go. He's confiding in us. Let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to read a quote, because this is what he said when he was asked additional questions. He said, 9/11 was done by people in what? Our own government, in our own banking system. I'm having a hard time reading that. My eyes are bad. To perpetuate the fear of the American people, to do what? To subordinate them. Then there's another word, to make them passive, and that is in the tenets of communism. So they want to subordinate us and make us passive to anything the government wants to do. That's what it's about, to create what? An endless war on terror, keyword. Look, this whole war on terror is a fraud, a farce. It's very difficult to say that out loud because people are intimidated against saying it. Basically, it goes on to say they think you're a conspiracy theorist. But why did he do it? He wanted to clear his conscience. He knew he was dying. And it was just a couple of months after that, and he, in fact, did die. So he had no ulterior motive. He made no money. He basically wasn't going to go to his grave without telling the American people what had happened. Now, let's go on a little further, and we're going to get the motive for why they did 9/11. Let's go to the next slide. And here's what happened. They said immediately, we got to pass the Patriot Act. And what did Bush say? We got to have this thing passed, and we got to have it in 24 hours. And if we don't, I'm going to declare martial law. So what are they doing? They're basically negotiating. And the Democrats and Republicans got together and said, we did it. We passed the Patriot. Well, we wrote the Patriot Act, which was probably written months before. But at any rate, it's due to be signed. And guess what happens? At 3:45 in the morning, the day it's going to be signed, it's pulled. And it's pulled by Bush. And one is dropped on the table in its place that was written by the global financial elite. And boy, was it caustic. It basically created a situation where a government could be created that basically was a legal dictatorship. So I'm going to read what's on the screen here. And this is coming from somebody who ought to know. If you look down below, what you see is the person telling us this is a defense advisor to NATO. The interest behind the Bush administration, such as what? The CFR. Now, for those you don't know, that's Council on Foreign Relations. And what is their principal objective? To end all borders and to create a what? A one world government. Then the Trilateral Commission, same agenda. And then founded by Brzezinski for David Rockefeller, and the Bilderberger Group. They have prepared for and are now doing what? Moving to implement an open worldwide, wait for it, dictatorship, a dictatorship. Now, I told you that basically PNAC was written a year before 9/11. Let's go to this next slide, and you'll see the roots of where the Patriot Act came from. So now we're all the way back to World War II, and we're back to the rise of Adolf Hitler. And you know, these people are so dumb. Sun Tzu said, if you repeat the same strategy, the same playbook over and over again, they're eventually going to wake up and figure out what you're doing. So now look, we had an attack on the towers, and we passed the Patriot Act. What happened in Hitler's time? They burnt down the Reichstag, and Hitler blamed it on the communists, and he got something called the Enabling Act passed. And you know what? If you go back and do what I did, and you read both of them, you might be shocked. You know what you find is that basically the Patriot Act was modeled on, are you ready for it? The Enabling Act, which basically brought Hitler to power as the Fuhrer and fulfilled the quote that we made before, which gave the ability to Bush to put in a version of the Patriot Act written by the global financial elite to create what? A legal dictatorship. Let's go on down. And now anybody who does any investigation at all, if you go to the next slide, always looks for motive, means, and opportunity. And that's what we're going to dig into now. We're going to dig into how in the heck did this happen, who had the means to do it, who had the opportunity to do it, and therefore we can probably logically conclude, hey, I got a pretty good idea who did this. So let's go on down and we'll dig in to the people who were involved in bringing this heinous crime to the world. And for those of you who don't know, that gentleman right there was a politically connected real estate mogul by the name of Larry Silverstein. And every day he met, every weekday at least, he met his daughter at the 95th floor for breakfast. But you know what? God was on his side. He wasn't there that day. So he lived and he wasn't killed in the tower with all those other people. I wonder if that was an accident. And then here's what happened. For those who don't necessarily follow me, you may not know that I was a real estate broker for part of my career for 12 years. And I eventually got my own real estate company. So when it comes to real estate, I kind of know what I'm talking about. So here's what happened. I wouldn't have bought that building if I had the money. It would have been the last thing in the world I'd have bought. Why? It had 50% occupancy. Why? Because they had a $1 billion asbestos lawsuit going on. And they've been trying to tear it down and build a smaller building because, like I said, it had 50% occupancy. So when he bought it for 100, I think it was 125 million. But now here's where we get to his motive. Within days, he files and he gets a new insurance policy. And what did it have in it? It said, hey, if this tower has ever fall down, and they've been trying for 10 years to get permission to tear it down and rebuild another, but they couldn't because of the environmental issues with the asbestos. Hey, if it comes down, I get the right to rebuild it. Okay. And then he said that wasn't enough. He said, if it comes down and it happens to be that it's taken down through a terrorist act, I get double indemnity. And there were two towers. And so he got $4.5 billion in around 6 weeks of buying those buildings. And his $125 million building that nobody in their right mind would have bought made him one of the richest men in the world. Is it just me, or does that stink to high heaven? Let's go down to the next slide. And now, anytime you have something happen that's complicated, you start to ask the question, could there have been an inside man? And now I want to give you a little pedigree of the Bush family. There was Prescott Bush, who colluded with Germany during World War II. And then both Bushes, who were presidents, both senior and junior, were members of Skull and Crossbones. And for those who don't know, that's in an Ivy League school. I think it's either Yale or Princeton. And they groom people for positions of power, to be part of what? The global financial system that controls the world. And so then there's, of course, President Bush, and there's Governor Bush, a governor of Florida. But then there's a Bush brother that you probably don't know, Marvin Bush. And it just so happens that in my analysis, he very, very, very well, very likely was the inside man. And why do I say that? Because he was a principal in a company called Securicom. And I mean, coincidences just never cease to happen. It just happened that his company, they owned the security contract for the Twin Towers, but didn't stop there for Dallas Airport, and also for United Airlines. So there we have a man who had the ability to basically make this thing possible. So how did those towers come down? Let's go back and look at what happened. Remember, Silverstein buys it, and then every weekend for several weeks, when the people came in on Mondays, there were a gray granular dust on their desk. What was happening? Remember, I worked in construction, for those of you who know my background, building towers like that, and there had never in the history of the world been a steel building come down from a fire. Period. Never happened. So I went and investigated, and I worked when I was working building skyscrapers with thermite, the very thing that people use when they do controlled demolition. It burns at 4,500 degrees. You can slice through steel columns like butter. We'll get to that in a minute. But basically, here's what happened. We had that first tell, those gray granules, and then oh my goodness, the coincidences just won't stop. They decided they were going to do a fiber optics upgrade on those towers. So just a few weeks before, they shut everything down, all the elevators, all the cameras, everything was down. A whole group of people went in to ostensibly put in new fiber optics. or alternatively, maybe to wire the place for controlled demolition. So when we get into another slide here, I'm going to show you that that is absolutely, in my opinion, what happened. They wired it for controlled demolition. Let's go on down to the next slide. And if all I had to show you was this slide, I think this slide alone should convince you that those towers did not fall on their own from a fire. They came down because of controlled demolition. So this is right out of history books. 1945, a B-22 bomber does what? It crashes into the Empire State Building, and that plane is every bit as big as the one that they say hit the towers, or the two that they say hit the towers. Well, there's an actual photograph of the Empire State Building where that plane hit. And look down below at the text. 48 hours later, that building was not on the ground in rubble. It had not collapsed. It was open for business. So how is it that they brought the Empire State Building back online in 48 hours and the towers came down, and even Building 7 that didn't even get hit by a plane and that had just a little debris fall on it and a couple of little bitty fires going on, and yet it came down. So the conspiracy just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. Now let's go on, and I'm going to show you some pictures. And now that you're seeing it 48 years later, let's go to the next slide. And your cognitive dissonance isn't there, and you're not listening to the lying news. Let's look at what's going on. You see over to the left where the planes hit, you see the fire. Now, think about that. So that was about the 73rd floor. And look at the picture. All the glass from that point forward is all intact. Now, I ask you a question. How is it then that in photographs taken right after before the buildings came down, all the glass in the lobby was broken? The staircases going to the basement had collapsed. And when they came in to clean up, they found that all the beams in the basement were cut at a 45-degree angle facing in, which is exactly what you have to do to create controlled demolition. You pop a building from the top. That's where all those granules were coming from when they were putting explosives in the floors above where the planes hit. And then you cut all the beams in the basement at a 45-degree angle. You get the perfect view and the building falls. And then now think, we're going to go cook some supper over here on my gas stove, and it gets really hot, about 1,200 degrees, I think. But you have to have way hotter than that to melt steel. So that next picture is them cleaning up the debris, and they're pulling out tons of molten metal. That's from that picture in the center where they basically cut all those columns, and that steel melted at 4,500 degrees, and there were shape charges. Look at that piece of steel bent into a C shape. You don't have that in a fire. That is a controlled demolition telltale. That is a shape charge that does that. Then we go over to Building 7, and it's towering up, and you don't see any flames. It's got two little bitty fires, but we're going to find out a year later what they did with that. But now I'm going to tell you why it had to come down. It was the housing, a whole bunch of white-collar crimes, meaning banker gangster crimes, and Enron was going on, which was a huge scandal at the time. And supposedly there was gold that was in the basement. So they needed that building to come down as well. So here's what happens. Now, a year later, let's go on down to the next slide. I don't think I need to do any more on that one. Let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to tell you what happens. So it's a year later, and Larry Silverstein is interviewed on PBS. And he says, I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure that they were going to be able to contain the fire, that little bitty fire that on the building that didn't get hit by a plane. And so the conversation goes on, and he says, there's been so much loss of life. Let's just pull it. Pull it. What the heck does that mean? That means controlled demolition, folks. He told you right there in his own words that building 2 was rigged for controlled demolition. And it takes a long time to prep a building for controlled demolition. So he didn't send firemen in that day and wire that thing to come down. It was wired beforehand, just like the other 2 buildings. They had a plan, and the plan was to take us into a perpetual war that would drive us deep, deep, deep into debt. And remember, they control nations by driving them into debt, into so much debt that eventually they collapse. And that's where we're at today. And that's why we're doing this story now, because we're at the point of the Great Reset. And with the whistleblowers that are going to come out and the truth that you're getting here and you're going to get from others, we're going to win this war. And we are not going to be under the control of the global financial elite slave system anymore. We're going to be under God's kingdom. We're going to have not fiat currency that's printed based on nothing, but we're going to have a currency that is based on commodities that cannot be manipulated and controlled. So I'm telling this story to gear you up to get ready to pay attention to the whistleblowers that are coming out. Now we're going to go look for some forensic evidence in the other crash sites. If we go to the next slide, we're going to go to the Pentagon. And come on, guys, just see your eyes. Look at that hole. Look at that plane. Is there any way that that plane went through that hole? And if it did, is there any way in the world that those wings wouldn't be laying on the lawn? Come on, you know what they told us? I think we're so stupid. They said the fire was so hot. Remember, it's basically just jet fuel, and it only burns at a few hundred degrees. They said it was so hot, it melted the titanium engines. There wasn't any appreciable debris. And you know something else that happened? In the flight path, that whatever it was, which wasn't a plane, it was probably a drone or a missile, came in and took that building out. They went around to every business and took all their camera film and said, if you copy any of this and share it with anybody, you'll go to jail. So basically, there's your cover up. There's what's going on. Let's go to the next picture and we'll see the next crash site, and that's at Shanksville, PA. And this, you remember, is the plane where the passengers had taken over. And the story that really, I think, was the truth is that they had to bring that plane down. They could not let it land and let it be known what was going on. And so the story that I've heard that makes more sense than this nonsense you're looking at is that miles from that site, it was shot down at high altitude by F-15 planes, thrown into millions of pieces scattered over miles, and basically way far away from what they call the crash site. And so the person who came there as the coroner, Wally Somerset, basically said 20 minutes. All it took was 20 minutes. I never saw any appreciable wreckage. I never saw any bodies. I never saw any blood. And I basically said to myself, this is a stage site. It just looks like somebody dug a hole in the ground and dropped some debris from the air. And basically, this was a false flag event. I mean, he just came right out and told you, folks, use your own eyes. It's right there before you. But we were so traumatized when this happened, and we still trusted our government that millions of us swallowed this thing hook, line, and sinker, and never really realized it had all been planned. And it was planned to take us into a perpetual war. It was planned to take us into '08. It was planned to drive us deep, deep, deep into debt and orchestrate the events that now are leading into the financial collapse of not only the United States, but the entire world, leading to the end game agenda of the global financial elite, which is to basically have a one world dictatorship. Think of what they said Bush was doing with the Patriot Act, and then enters the UN. And what was the agenda of the UN? And it's right on the Georgia Guidestones, to reduce global population to 500 million, or under Agenda 21 between 2030 and 2050, they were going to give us a little bit of breathing space, reduce population to 1 billion. That's the story, folks. That's what you need to be thinking and keeping in your mind as all these whistleblowers come out over the next few weeks. Let's go to the next slide, and then we're gonna basically find out, well, who's our enemy? Well, if you've been listening to what I'm saying and you believe me, you know at a minimum it was both Bushes, and you know it was Clinton, and you know it was Obama, and a whole host of other people. But the organizations above them, they're all just puppets. They're all be puppeted. And even the institutions that I'm showing on the slide are just puppets. The global financial elite, the people whose names you never hear, whose faces you never see, are the ones who are the actual puppet makers. So if we come into this period of the tsunami of whistleblowers, you need to keep this in mind. We have to have deglobalization. That's why trade is being taken away from China, because he controls trade, controls all the necessities of life, and they control the money. And we have to have de-dollarization so that no nation can be controlled through trade or through money, and all nations can have currencies at relative parity, and we can finally go in and and execute on something that's been in play, trying to be birthed since the 1990s, which is Nasara. And that's something for another day, but that's the reset that's going to happen when we win this battle, and we are winning, and we get out from under the Fed and we go back to our foundations, and we have one simple tax, a sales tax, a 14% sales tax. And there's much more to it. But basically, I want you to look at this slide. The institutions that are named on here have to be taken down so that once this happens, they don't get back in and just do it all over again. So the global central banking system has to be gone. And basically every nation in the world has to have sovereign currency, because you cannot have a sovereign nation if you do not have sovereign currency. You cannot have a sovereign nation if you don't have a sovereign border. And who is controlling those things? Well, the UN, for one, is controlling them with their global governance organizations. And just for those who maybe don't know, what are some of those global governance organizations? Well, USAID, and that's been in the scandals lately, right? And then the World Bank and the IMS. Remember, money controls, and then they manipulate things with war. So we got NATO tucked in there, and then we got World Trade, and that's how they shifted the power from the United States to China, taking our manufacturing and gutting it and giving it to China. And then we're all the way up to COVID by now. And what do we got there? We got the World Health Organization, which I think people are finally beginning to realize, hey, COVID was patented. That means it's man-made. That means it was a bioweapon, and millions of us were killed. So that war, that was a war, was bigger than all the other wars combined. So basically, we have to understand who the enemy is and give him names. And so basically, it was the Act of 1871 that created the corporation. And so the power of the world, we lost our status as a republic, and we became a democracy, which is a mobocracy, which is a dictatorship, which is exactly what Bush was pushing us towards, right? And we have been controlled since 1871 by who? By the city of London, by the Vatican, and by Washington, D.C., which is not a state, which is controlled by the global financial elite. And what's coming is all of those entities and all their power and all their money is going to be taken away. And along with it, here's what's going to happen. Here's what you're going to see. We're going to find out, this is the most important thing that's coming up probably in the next 60 days, that the elections in the United States have been tampered with for probably over 100 years, that they tampered with the 2016 election, they stole the 2020 election, that Venezuela and a number of other nations, including China, have tampered in our elections for a long time. And 72 nations, you will find verification that they have had their elections stolen. What does that mean? That means that there are governments around the world that are not legal, that are false governments. And basically, I think we can look to Washington, D.C., and we can expect that 90% of the politicians in Washington are going to be removed because they were not elected. Judges that were appointed are going to be taken out. And what have we been seeing for the last several years? CEOs making $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, $30 million a year, stepping down from their positions. Nobody steps down from a position like that. They're removed. So think about what Donald Trump did with the capitulation tour, where he went around to nation after nation after nation, and the most unbelievable things happened. I'll just give you one or two quick examples. I don't want to make this last all day. So he goes to Saudi Arabia, and the second he gets there, the crown prince is arrested. A new crown prince is thrown, and they have a history. They have a sword dance. And basically, nobody can touch that sword except the new crown prince. He hands it to Trump. And what does that mean? It means that Saudi Arabia is now at war against the global financial elite in concert with the United States. He goes to England and walks in front of the Queen. He goes to the Vatican, where the story is that basically they capitulated just like all these other countries. They went all over the world, and some 650 plane loads of gold were taken out of the Vatican, and it's on and on and on. It goes, you need to basically pay attention. So all of that that's been out there, that's been rumored, that's been talked about, that we've had people try to tell us about, it's all coming out in the form of substantiated whistleblowers that are coming down the road. And then we go back again, Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the World Economic Forum, Davos, the Illuminati, and many more, all have to be taken out, because we have to take out the control of the money and the control of the spheres of influence. So basically, we're going to get back, when this reset is done, We no longer have the lying media. We'll have an actual news media that'll tell us the truth. The entertainment industry is going to get gutted. The corporations are going to get gutted. The banks are going to get gutted. The politicians that were there that weren't supposed to be there are going to be taken out. And America and the world is going to be saved by God, who's going to intervene and create miracles and signs and wonders the likes of which you can't believe. And we're going to get an economic system that's not based on fiat currency printed out of nothing, and that carries a debt obligation that enslaves us. We're going to go to God's economic system based on commodities that cannot be manipulated and controlled, and they will no longer be able to inflate our currency, to deflate it, to cause financial collapses on demand, to cause wage suppression, and to literally and absolutely control us. And in the coming weeks, I want to tell you, once these whistleblowers start to come out en masse, I'm going to release a series of shows, and I want the people out there to listen. I think the people from 50 on are pretty aware. They've probably been red-pilled, but I think the younger generations are largely unaware, and they're the ones that have been affected the most. That's basically the Generation Zs, and that's the I can't remember the name of it, but the next generation up. And basically, as we go through this, I'm going to go through the real estate market. Now, remember, that was my area of expertise, and I'm going to tell you how they have colluded to make sure that those two generations never realized the American dream, ever. There are very few of you are going to be able to buy a house unless we win this war, and we will win. But we need all of you out there to be informed. And when they start arresting the Barack Obamas and the Bushes and the Clintons and on it goes, we need to have you stand down, and we need to basically be able to make this transition peacefully. We don't need to go into civil war. So that's why I am breaking all this down now. So let's go to the next slide. Now we're past basically 9/11, and this is hinting at what's coming. This is the whistleblowers that are coming out. So Tulsi Gabbard is coming out and she's saying, 2016, Hillary Clinton was in trouble. They had planned for her to win, but she got caught in yet another scandal. She had did 32,000 emails, many of which were classified and that were stored on her personal computer. And so that's part of what's coming out through Tulsi Gabbard. And then we go on, and once they don't get her in, Barack Obama goes nuts, and he says, we got to rewrite the Russia collusion story, and we've got to make it so that, in fact, Russia did collude to try to get Trump in. And the reality of it is, folks, they had every kind of dirt you can imagine on Hillary Clinton. They would have just liked to sit back and let her win that election and then puppet her, blackmail her, and control the United States. They didn't want Donald Trump. He had some personal scandals, but remember, he was new in politics. He didn't have any real dirt that they could get. So they had neither the means nor the motive to basically interfere in that election in an effort to get Donald Trump elected. They wanted Hillary Clinton in. And then let's go on down, and this is another scandal that's coming out that's going to result in arrests. If we go to the next slide, we're going to see that we're going to go to January the 6th. And what they were trying to do there was basically convict Trump of insurrection so that they could get him out and he could never run for office again. But remember now, when we talked about the corporation, that includes the District of Columbia, i.e. Washington. And so Trump didn't have the power. He couldn't go in and say, I want the National Guard there because I don't want to have any riots or anything. And Nancy turned him down, and the mayor of Washington turned him down. And so he made a speech, and I listened to every word of it. And at the end, he said, go ahead and march to the White House and peacefully protest. So all pandemonium broke out, and God always says, I got it all. So we had people, Trump knew what was going on. That's why he wanted to bring the National Guard in. And so basically they sent people into the White House, and they got Nancy's computer and apparently several others. They've been holding all that information, and it's going to bring Schumer down and Nancy down and Hillary down and Obama down, and we're going to just clean out Washington. And like I said, probably 90% of the people there were put there illegally, and they will be removed. And so let's go on down one more slide. And I'm trying to get you to to think about a puppet master. And now he's puppeted by people above, but of all the people we've been talking about today, the political leader that has been our biggest enemy and been controlling these other people is none other than Barack Obama. So if you look at that picture up above on the left, that's portraying him as a Muslim and him and his wife as radical terrorists. And that's not my picture. That's out of the New Yorker. And then you go down below, and remember, there was a lot of stink. They were trying to tell us, Trump was trying to tell us, this man was not even born in the United States. He has no right to be a president. He is a Muslim. And then you go down to the bottom below, and basically they're playing the national anthem. And I'm not sure who the person in the middle is, but the woman is Hillary. And basically they've got their hands on their heart, and Barack stands there with his hands down between his groin. He basically hates America. So now here are some things. I got droves of information that you need to know about Barack Obama. He said these things, all these things. He said, the sweetest sound I know is the Muslim call to prayer. Now here's some more history. For those who haven't been following me, I died in 1968. God said, immediately, go read the Bible cover to cover. When you finish it, go read the Quran cover to cover. So I know whereof I speak. If you answer the Muslim call to prayer, you are a Muslim forever. And if you're a Muslim, then those who are not Muslims are infidels, and they're your enemy. And Barack Obama answered the Muslim call to prayer, and look at him dressed in Muslim garb. And then we go on, and we're going to let him indict himself. Here's what he said. Obama said he would disarm America to a level acceptable to his Muslim brothers. Well, did he do it? You bet your bippy he did. Basically, what happened is he neutered the military, brought in the gays, and so on and so forth, and recruitment came down. And basically, when Trump came in, he had to spend $1 trillion to bring our military back to fighting status. And then what did he say next? I will listen to this. This should be the tell of all tales. I will stand with the Muslims should the political winds shift in an ugly direction. And that's right out of his own book, Audacity of Hope, on page 261. And then let's keep on going down with the indictment. Obama refused to place his hand. So I guess I basically covered that one. And then Obama, this one is huge. And this one is going to come out, and this is going to relate to what they're going to try to do the United States. So that picture you see was another one of these huge scandals where basically Iran was out of money. They had all kinds of sanctions put on. The proxies weren't doing much of anything because they had no money. And Barack Obama sent pallets of money in cargo planes in the middle of the night over, and then he removed all the sanctions. And all of a sudden, gee whiz, go figure, all those proxies woke up and started doing all kinds of stuff again. I mean, like he said, things turned bad. I'm going to stand with my Muslim brothers. And then we go down to the final one here. When asked about his faith in an interview, he said, my Muslim faith, and then that was later printed in Dreams of My Father. And so we're down to the last couple of things. Obama considers the American people his enemy. We are infidels. And because of that, we are his enemy. And then listen to this. Listen to what he says here. I found a solace in nurturing a perverse sense of grievance and animosity against my mother's race. So there you have it. He has declared who he is and what he stands for and who he stands with. And it is not the American people. And that is the man who was in league with Hillary Clinton. That is the man who has been in the microphone whispering in the ear of Joe Biden. And that is, as far as I'm concerned, enemy number one of the United States of America. Let's go on down, and here's another one of those whistleblowers that's coming out. Basically, we found out something called Act Blue was generating trillions of dollars for the Democrats. And here's what it was. It was a money laundering deal. So this is unfolding, and these people are going to be coming forward and giving testimony, and all kinds of proof is going to happen. But here's how the scheme was orchestrated. Basically, they said, well, if we just take a little bit of money here and a little bit of money there and a little bit of money there, figure? Nobody will figure. So basically went in and looked at the voting rolls and said, oh, we got all these dead people. We can use them. We got all these old people. They don't know what's going on. And let's just take a little bit of money here and 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 here on an infinity until it mounts up to trillions of dollars. And then we got a huge war chest to get whoever we wanted elected. And then we got all this money that we can use for any nefarious act we want in order to do what? In order to basically create a legal dictatorship in the United States of America. All of that, all of these scandals are unrolling before your very eyes. I wanted to set the stage with this. We're going to do a follow-up with this tomorrow. And on Friday, unless there's some kind of cancellation, we're going to have on my own channel on Liberty Crusade Official 107. And 107 is going to go into more of this. He has some inside information. I don't want to steal his thunder, but please follow us. We're going to do 3 shows this week, which is unusual. So with that, let's just go to the last slide. And all I have to say is we're at the time where the truth is coming out. The truth will set you free. God says the truth will set you free. Well, I think that the younger generation, 30 to 50, is still asleep. Most of the older people have been red-pilled. Please, this is going to take several more months before we actually get everything back, get the reset done, and get control. And in between, there's going to be the 2026 election. We need to have you informed by the time that election comes. And the best way to do it is by this God-ordained book. God has had me spend my life putting all this information together so I can give it to you so that you can see all the pieces, so you can see what was happening from a 60,000-foot view where you can see the forest for the trees. You need to know who our enemy is, how they've taken our freedom away, how we're going to get it back, and how we will keep it. So we need an informed public that can help us get out from under this dictatorship that we're under and get back our republic, which is the government of the people, by the people, for the people, which requires an informed public willing to vote their conscience. So you're useless to us in this fight if you don't know. And what we're going to be doing in the coming months as we get closer to the election, I'm going to be laying out point by point by point all the things that they've done to control us, which will show you all the things you need to be voting for. So any candidate that stands against the things that we will be enumerating in the coming months is a candidate you want to vote against, because we want to get our freedom back. And the way we get it is we have to control the money, and we have to purge out all of the enemies that are in the swamp. And it's going to happen, but we cannot afford to have a civil war, which means you guys, all of you out there, have to wake up. And when they start arresting these people, you have to do a stand down. The worst thing in the world we can have is to have riots across this nation. So please be a patriot. Please buy this book. Please read it. When you finish it, give it to a friend, hopefully somebody who thinks differently than you, so we can open the eyes of another person, and then tell all your friends all the things that you're learning here. So, like I said, we're going to be doing 3 shows this week. So come back and we'll see another piece of this later this week. So thank you very much for joining us. And before you go, please help me help you by subscribing and by hitting that like button so we can drive that algorithm so that we can get more people that know the truth and will stand up and help save this nation. See you next time.